G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. I wanted to make a video today addressing the new list manager that we have in place, Matthew Clarke from Richmond. And this sort of caps off, a period of transition definitely for West Coast. Like there's been a lot of changes in many senses since the end of the season, and we've just added to it. And for the most part, I think we've made good changes and good acquisitions, and hopefully this Matthew Clarke guy who replaces Rowan O'Brien is made of the right stuff, and he has very much a good record and a very well-credentialed man at that. So just to cover off a little bit of the changes that we've seen so far at West Coast. Well, we know the 3 retirements. That is not insignificant. One of them was our captain. We got a new CEO. Nisbet sort of was either pushed out or stepped aside, a year early. Don Pike into the role. And for the most part, I'm pretty happy with that. It seems like a good acquisition there as well. Generally been around successful clubs in successful environments. And I've talked about that before on True Footy. New fitness guy, Matthew Innes. Again, I always forget the title. Never bothered to look it up. But Innes is like sort of overseeing the high performance and the strength and conditioning side of things. We've made a change there. We've made 1 or 2 coaching switch ups. So Daniel Pratt left, Luke Shuey comes in, and then they will sort of shuffle it around. Shuey's, I think, overseeing stoppages, and that means Schofield is now essentially like 2IC at the club, but also overseeing the midfield generally. Then on top of that, you got some more off-field stuff in the new banner, and hopefully the new song. So since I made that video, it is increasingly more apparent that a new song is going to happen, but it hasn't been officially announced yet. I do wonder if West Coast sort of decided to let that leak a little bit early to sort of mitigate some of the negative sentiment around the preseason derby. Like I've said in the last video, I think people have overreacted about the derby, but at the same time, there still was negative sentiment. Just a theory, but I do think that new song is coming. So Don Pike has made some good moves to begin with. So let's now talk about the list manager position. Rowan O'Brien, he stepped aside after 33 years at this football club. That is very significant and been there for the entire thing. Well, nearly. He's been there for all of our premierships and in different roles. So I think it was originally as a recruiter. Then I think he was like the national recruiting manager, or exactly what the title is. Then he became the list manager more recently, and there are differences to all of these roles. So what Matthew Clarke is now stepping into is the list manager position, rather than necessarily being really involved with recruiting. It's a list manager position. And for context, Craig Vozzo once held that position. And I believe that Craig Vozzo was sort of more involved in like contracts and stuff like that. I think that was his legal background rather than necessarily being a footballer. So there are so many different things that a list manager can do, and all of them will have different strengths. So trying to accurately forecast like what sort of value Clarke will add is not simple, but you can be rest assured that he is as well credentialed as we could have possibly hoped. One interesting thing that happened right before this, I think Rowan O'Brien was announced as joining Essendon. So on Essendon, they're on a transition phase with their list management team. I'm reading an article. I'm pretty sure Matthew Rosa has replaced Dodoro over there, and they've essentially taken O'Brien on as a bit of a mentor. So it's mildly interesting that he's taken another role. It was sort of reported that he had stepped down from West Coast. We'll never really know if it was West Coast that decided to make the change or if O'Brien stood aside. I think it was O'Brien, but either way, the result's the same. We have a new list manager. So Matthew Clarke has 25 years in the recruiting field. Started as a recruiter for Melbourne in 1997 and then continued there until 2009, and that's when he joined Richmond and was ultimately right there for the entire time Richmond went from being what they were to what they would eventually become. So that's good experience to have. It's too simplistic to say, okay, he was there at Richmond while they were good, he must be good, and he was there at Melbourne during a pretty successful period. So between 1997 and 2009, that means he was there, when Melbourne were in grand finals and finals. I want to say they were in the finals maybe like 2004, I think also 2006. And then sort of got out right when they became a basket case. Then he went to another basket case at the time in Richmond, and then they became, one of the greatest teams in the modern era. So it's too simplistic to say that automatically makes him good, but it's pretty compelling, isn't it? And also, a proven history of being involved in a club that kind of had to rebuild from being a bit of a joke. I remember when Damien Hardwick took over from Richmond, that year, there was literally a conversation as to whether Richmond would win a game. And then about halfway through that year, I remember they beat us by 50 points at the MCG. Jack Riewoldt kicked 10, and we would go on to win the wooden spoon, and Richmond haven't really taken too many backward steps since then, or at least until, 2021. So at Richmond, he was part of the recruiting team. Then in 2016, he became the national recruiting manager, which means that he was leading a team of recruiters rather than doing the recruiting himself. But he was still part of the recruiting network prior to that. So it's also worth noting that this is a promotion for Matthew Clarke. Maybe it's not completely accurate to say we poached him. We came across and we offered him a promotion. So I guess that's still poaching him, but it's not like we just prized him out of Richmond. And like I said, a good level of experience from Richmond through building up a club from nothing to something amazing. And one thing I do think Richmond deserve a lot of credit for, bearing in mind he wasn't there when they drafted guys like Cochin and Rance and Rewalt and Martin. That was all before. But Richmond did have a knack of plucking talent and quality role players late in drafts and in the rookie draft and stuff like that. So maybe we can take something from that. I don't know. So like I said, as the list manager, it's interesting tricky to try and forecast exactly what the impact he'll have on the club. You know, I don't necessarily think he's going to have a big sway in terms of the types of players we recruit. He's going to potentially come there with a nuanced and different perspective to the recruiting team that we already have, and certainly add something and to add some input. And that sort of IP that he's going to have from Richmond will certainly prove valuable. But he's also more kind of responsible for things like contract negotiations and retaining our players. And I'd imagine the salary cap is more or less his responsibility as well, which means there's a few deals he's got to get done this year. You know, Gaff's out of contract, whether he gets another contract, Elliot Yeo. And, you know, potentially we're going to be on the market for recruiting some mature players this year, which I think is necessary. I'm not necessarily fixated on who that should be, whether it should be Tim English, Liam Baker. Liam Baker obviously just plays for the club that Matthew Clarke came from, so I don't know if that gets us a foot in the door, maybe not. Although there would be a pre-existing relationship between him and the agent, so you never know. But I can only think this is positive. You know, as far as potential candidates go to replace Rowan O'Brien, who obviously had a pretty successful stint at West Coast. He probably was the best, you know, on offer in the market, and we've been able to give him a promotion to a new role. But in terms of drafting and recruiting, A, I don't know how much it's going to change, and B, I don't really know how much needs to change. You know, I think like the last 3 years, our drafting has been good. Our trades have been okay. We've had a few misfires, like trying to get Zach Langdon and Petrevsky Seaton to play good football. But between like 2018 to 2021, we didn't have a single first rounder in that period. So all in all, it's a hard one to assess, but you know, we got to be generally pleased with the fact that we probably got the best person on offer. And he certainly got probably the best credentials and best record of any prospective candidate for this role that you could possibly think of. So good news as far as I'm concerned, guys. Let me know in the comment section your thoughts. Now for the Eagles preseason game, as you're watching this, I think that will be tomorrow. Being in England, this game is at 4 a.m. and I have a night out the night before, so I'm probably not going to see it in real time. Won't be streaming it on True Footy. I'll wake up, I'll try and get up around 8 or 9, watch the game, and then do a review video here on True Eagle. But for now, I'll say goodbye. I'll thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.